Welcome to the Pantheon.Plus Rewind.
Hey there, welcome to episode 24 of The Rewind. This is a podcast that's all about what's going on with Pantheon Rise of the Fallen, the upcoming MMORPG by Visionary Realms, and the community that's following its development. So if this is your first time joining us, welcome. We had a huge week last week with our pre-Alpha 5 story, and we had over like 120 people hanging out during the chat, during the YouTube premiere. It was amazing, and if that's the episode that brought you to this show, I could not be happier. But we're also not going to sit back and just rest on our laurels because we got to keep moving forward on the journey towards launch. And as always, joining me on that journey is fresh off his epic story, my traveling companion, Minus. How are you doing, man?
Oh, doing good, man. Doing good. Yeah, last week was nuts. We had probably more people in that live premiere for the Rewind than maybe we've ever had in Pantheon.Plus U. I mean, we might have had a couple more than that when Joppa was there, but that's pretty crazy, man, to think that, 24 episodes in, we're seeing a lot of success and having a lot of fun with the community with the Rewind. It's really rewarding. Like, thank you to everybody who came and listened. And I hope some of you guys are sticking around to join us for the future premieres and hang out with us and kind of share what you're thinking, because that's what this show's all about, right? That being said, outside of that, like you said, let's get moving, get back into the flow here, get the information when you typically get out. And let's not talk about football, Theric, at all, actually. $150 in the hole. My team lost. But hey, you had a good week. I had a good week.
Yeah, I was hoping for the trifecta where we had a great rewind. My team won and your team won, but we weren't quite that lucky. So
that's hoping, being a Dallas Cowboys fan. So
yeah, it's being a Bears fan too, but we got a little gift from the gods on that one. And hopefully this week goes better for both of us.
All right. So you ready to jump into this?
Yeah, let's roll, man.
This week in Visionary Realms news and notes. All right. We're back this week talking VR and social media recap. And we're going to start with Twitter. And they had a great question that I think within like an hour, 90 people responded to this one, which is pretty funny. Yeah. So they said, in one word, your thoughts on in-game flying. Now, I could have just read everybody's and just went, no. This person said no, because that was pretty much the vibe. But let's go ahead and read some of them. So Basgrim said, no. Start with that. Militus said trivialization. Mm-hmm. It's funny. That's an easy word. Like, I know the word. It's hard for me to say. I don't know what's wrong with my face. Like that I can't say things.
You need to work on that a little bit. Maybe you need to do some exercises or something. I don't know. But trivialization is a good one. A lot of people have a hard time with these because sometimes they do these one-word answers, right? And a lot of people just sort of ignore it and they're like, whatever, I'm just going to go off and say my bit, right? 240 characters later. But trivialization is pretty good when you can come up with that one perfect word for it.
Yeah. Alicera said IDK. That's technically 3 words, but she does have the thinking emoji, so she gets points there.
Clever.
Chobenhood said no. So he did his one-word answer, but then he did go into an explanation. He said, we'll already have ports from druids and wizards for fast travel, in quotes. Flying mounts may be slower than instantly teleporting to an area, but it still removes the social interaction and reliance on community. Nate W. said no. To elaborate, flying in WoW terms basically ruins the social aspects of the game. Guild Wars 2 had a very interesting mount system, but it's not specific to just flying. Taxi-style flying would be suitable and not game-breaking. Pizzazz says depends. As a mount, no. As a set form of taxi travel, yes. So we're seeing kind of a few people throwing that taxi travel out there.
A little down the middle. Not everybody's 100% no. Some people have some exceptions, and I don't know. We'll see.
DPW says no. Usually makes the game world feel small and not dangerous. Shady Silhouette says mistake. And Drac had, in my opinion, the best answer to all of it. He literally screen clipped Joppa talking in our chat from an old episode of Pantheon.Plus U, and he has it. He just put at Joppa VR and then the picture, and it says, Joppa says, as long as I'm here, Pantheon will never have flying mounts. So,
so there's your answer.
that was a really good way to just boom. There you go. On that question, Kilson.
Drop the mic on that one.
Yeah, without a doubt. So there were probably, like you said, at the time, like 90 posts, and it blew up way bigger than that. And literally 70 out of those 90 just simply said the word no. And I tend to agree with that pretty heavily, actually. See, the thing for me is if you're building a dangerous world and you've made climbing this key part of the adventure in the game, flying negates both of those things. Like the dangerous world, you skip it. And like climbing would instantly become useless if you could just fly. Like, why would you even climb? Like, it wouldn't matter. Flying over content that you'd otherwise have a way to like find a way around or fight through or to get to where you're going is sort of that key piece of the dangerous world. And if you can fly, like I said before, like you're not going to climb. Like that's the biggest part of this. I think there's a value in some sort of taxi service personally, but it would have to be slow. Or just like the route is stupid, right? Like you go in a huge circle to get to like straight ahead. But as far as player flying, like I'm really with the majority here. It's just the word I used and I put a parenthesis so that it would work. Was counterproductive. So that's where I'm at. I can't think that you would be different, but what's your thoughts here?
No, I'm not very different. It's, I think it would undermine, like you said, counterproductive. I think the word is undermine. It would undermine their whole design philosophy if they did this. And I didn't read all the responses, but I don't think there were hardly any people that said yes to this. I mean, we have flying mounts in so many other games, and it really, we've come to learn sort of the pros and cons pretty well. And I think, Joppa's position is pretty strong. I actually had this in here and then you added Drax's response later. So I was like, oh yeah, exactly. Right. That's exactly what it should be. It's about keeping the world feeling big, making exploration like a long-term goal, right? Like don't take out exploration, but through this means of doing it. And I had an idea though, and let me just throw this out there and see what you think, because it's sort of, off the cuff, but what if they did put in flying mounts and they populated the sky with like dangerous monsters or something like that? Or what if like when you took flight, it meant there was like a chance you'd be randomly struck by lightning or something? Like if it didn't trivialize the content so drastically, would it be more palatable, right? What if there was some risk involved? So, you could lower that travel time that I think, that's why they put mounts in to get people from point A to point B quicker, but you still made it somewhat risky. Would that make it more okay, do you think? What do you think?
I don't. I mean, because like if you say you had to climb like a decently high ledge and it took a majority of your stamina to get up there and do it. Yeah. And you could just hop on your mount, fly up real quick and land before there's any risk of danger. Now, climbing again, like, we talked about climbing a little bit, even last week when we were talking about the PA5 experience. And, there's so many people who have dubbed it to be gimmicky. And the way that it is right now in the game, I do not believe it's gimmicky at all. I think it's a key component. Joppa's really into like the Zelda games, right? In the newer Zelda game, climbing was a really big deal. And if you could just skip all that with flying real quickly, like, it just doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't make sense to how the game's being designed. We've seen zones reworked for climbing. I don't think flying has any place in Pantheon, even in future expansions. I got to be honest with you.
You know what's interesting about that, actually? You bring up the Breath of the Wild. Breath of the Wild doesn't have flying. It has gliding, though, right? So what the attraction, and the reason climbing in that game is, one of the reasons it's so cool is because you can get up real high. There's some towers and there's some points in the world that are just so high above the rest of the world that when you jump off and you glide, you can get some, you can cover some pretty good ground. And, if if you've upgraded your gear to a certain extent, you can get further. And if the winds are prevailing in a certain direction, you can get further. So it's kind of an interesting thing because that game doesn't do it per se, but it does give a little bit of that feeling to it. So, you can do climbing with something like that, but I think you're right. I mean, in Pantheon, the way that we've seen it, it's not something that would, it wouldn't function the same way. And it would, if you put in mounts, flying mounts or anything even sort of like that, I think it would undermine that system quite a bit. So, yeah.
Yeah. And, that's not a horrible idea though, because you can't just glide from the ground. So you'd have to find a place to climb. And that's where climbing skill would really come into play. That would even maybe emphasize climbing more if you did have some sort of like glider. Don't make it crazy that you could glide across the whole world or something. But, that it's actually a pretty interesting thing to think about. Like, even if it was tied into like the stamina bar, then like that would be cool. Like, you climb up, you rest for a little bit, then you can glide, but you got to know that you got to start aiming yourself down as that, as your bar's running out. I wouldn't hate that. That could actually get you into more trouble than not.
That's right.
You in the middle of a
totally
camp.
does. And in Breath of the Wild, it totally does get you in trouble a lot of the times because you run out of stamina and you just plummet to your death, or you land in a spot where you didn't intend and that kind of thing. And we've seen those artifacts. Some of the artifacts. Remember that Skyhold grappler, right? And we don't know what it does exactly, but there are tools that they've hinted at that can help with some of the mechanics. So who knows? Who knows what the future holds? But in terms of flying mounts, as we know them now, that's not something that's going to happen, according to Joppa.
Yeah. Look at that. See, people on Twitter can say no almost 90 to 100 times, and we can still get a conversation out of it. So that's why I enjoy doing this with you, Theric.
Yeah, nothing's black. Nothing's black and white, man. We can always find that gray area.
So let's jump to the next thing they did. So this is really huge, and I just want to thank Visionary Realms for this, but they actually shared out our Rewind episode and a forum post that was linked to it to talk about it more and in more depth. And that was really cool. And I just wanted to take some time because there were some comments across various forms of social media that I'd love to read. And this is, please, if you're listening, don't think this is like us patting ourselves on the back, but it's interesting to see what people take away from it. And I think that if you're not reading these different social media posts, if you're just listening to the Rewind, I think there's some value here to see like what a story can mean. And it doesn't have to be our story. It could be, your story. It could be whoever gets to tell the story later, whoever gets to stream the game, but like what impact it has on people who are waiting for more. So I'm going to share some stuff here. There's a little bit of text. I'm going to try to get through it as quick as possible here. But Hokanu said, I'm guessing this is open to discuss now that you've officially released it. The part of Minus's story was all about Pantheon features leaning heavily into a highly social experience is probably the most exciting thing I've heard about the game this year. All the little features that people have doubted would create the need for social interaction have been reported by Minus to be doing exactly that it sounds in a pretty wonderful and organic way. I was super pumped by his breakdown. So thank you for that. That's awesome. I'm happy that the social aspects came through on that. Risky Bisky says, honestly, it's made me pretty excited to that regard. And he's kind of responding. He says, the fact that there would be social elements of the game already was the reason why I put a pledge down for the game initially. Now that there was a more organic content creator view that has shown this feeling of community, it makes me feel like putting down more. And he says, I honestly can't wait until the NDA is up. So some folks will be able to talk even more. And that's kind of what I was just hinting at. Like, people want more. They don't just want my story. They want any stories. They want more details.
Oh yeah, for sure. That's one of the consistent threads through all these that I've seen as well.
Yeah. Stonefish, who's actually, I think you read a forum post from him the other day.
Yeah, I did.
He actually said, this was a great story and he was happy to hear a few things. Number one, he highlighted there was no map and communication that was needed to gather, and we were using landmarks and a compass instead. He said 2, adventure had discovery woven in. 3, we had fun. And 4, they died in multiple ways. So I kind of like how he pulled away those things and kind of gathered those little things that were important to him, from a standpoint of what he wanted in the game. So really
new
cool.
New ways of dying is always something that I look for in a good experience.
Yeah. So let's see. Anadak, I'll go with.
There you go.
He said he finds it quite interesting that they talked about guiding by landmarks and compass. It's another person there that, the difference between having a map or not. He said we'd been told in the past it would be a /LOC for location as indicators for the group panel showing which direction group members are in. Have those features been removed? There might have been a location. I never tried. Were they just trying to be active more for the PA5 shakeout, or were they not there? So just interesting that as again, the landmark compass and the lack of a map stood out to them. Menoke says that, let's see here. He says, although it seems trivial, I mean, there's nothing new about a bear, but it is new in the world. And if you've never seen one in that world you're in, it's exciting, basically, he says. He says he remembers when he saw an elephant the first time in South Korea, and it was just magical, right?
I remember that too. That is a good memory.
And he says it kind of also enforces the whole we build worlds tenet of Pantheon, right? So like people are going to learn from different landmarks and animals and learn the world from their perspective, and then it'll kind of appear, new, when they're out there and seeing things like a griffin and things like that.
Yeah.
It's just kind of neat. Yeah,
I was just gonna say, going to different places, like you get used to one area and what's around there, and then you go to a different area and there's new creatures running around, and then it's that constant sense of what's around the next corner, right? Like what's over there, that people love that. I love that.
Yeah. Disposalist, who's also been featured quite a bit on our show, says the other aspect, of course, is not being forced to do anything. He says minus experience the Keeper storyline, but also just adventured and the story evolved on its own. He could have known all the lore or not known anything, and it still would have been able to be that same sort of adventure, is what he's saying. He says he loves VR's attitude towards this. We want to know the lore and the whys and wherefores. Be a keeper. Talk to NPCs. Do tasks, quests. You just want to kill stuff with your friends, enjoy the loot and progression. You can do that too. And you're going to have the same adventure, he says, right? So really, really cool point there too, that, you can play it a few different ways and you can kind of quench the thirst for maybe what you have specifically for Pantheon.
Exactly. And that goes back to what somebody else was saying about hearing other people's stories, right? Somebody else would tell a different story, but it could be just as exciting, even though they did something completely different.
For sure. So a couple other comments that stood out from other social media. So on our YouTube channel, we had a couple that were really cool. Wicked, he said, he has to say, first listening to your story gave me flashbacks of my first days logging into EQ. No map, just a compass, markers to see where you were. The excitement of exploration, pushing you forward to see what's around the next corner or over the next hill. So, another person who was... That's kind of crazy because honestly, we talked about this on Pantheon.Plus the other night, is like I wasn't somebody who was like anti-map. Like when everybody got real anti-map and I was just like, okay, whatever. Like either way is fine by me. But having experienced it, it's really interesting what it did for me. And I guess I never realized how much of an impact not having markers in a map you're just looking at to go find somebody, like how much that meant for exploration.
Yeah, it's really easy to take it for granted and to forget what it is not to have it. I know we've played games where there hasn't been one and I'm constantly hitting the M key, right? I'm like, bring up the map. Where's the map? And it's like, oh, there is no map. Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah, talk about muscle memory, right?
Yeah, exactly.
A couple more. One from Twitter here from Dave Pryor. He said he really enjoyed the rewind. He got rather emotional as we were recounting the experience. Says Pantheon will be a lot more than just another game for so many of us. It's such a relief that the promises are being fulfilled. Thank you. And thank you to Pantheon MMO. It was awesome. Really, I just love the fact that it took him back, to something he remembered and a feeling he was looking forward to. And then a couple from Reddit here. We had world's greatest CEO. He put great story. Thanks for sharing. And then he kind of said, this is interesting. And I brought this up because I was going to comment on this. So the biggest concern from it is simply, should a level 4 group be able to take down a level 9 to 10 boss like we did? So I just wanted to bring that up because, I probably should have said this when I recapped, and I'm going to say it now. Obviously, there's a lot of tuning that happens during these pre-alpha phases, and a lot of the reason we're testing is to do tuning. So my guess is a couple of things. One, it will be tuned, so it's probably a little bit harder than we had. And don't get me wrong, it was hard. But keep in mind too that we had said social aggro was off. So, we were able to pull one mob at a time pretty much everywhere, which made it a lot easier. If we weren't able to do that, that would have been much more difficult, maybe even impossible to do some of the stuff we did. So there were some things that, weren't enabled or weren't balanced yet that allowed us to do it. But at the same time, it was my belief that area was more made for a smaller group anyway. So play is going to matter. Like it's not just levels, it's play, it's how you do it. But yeah, I think some things were to our advantage in that situation. So
yeah, that social aggro is a huge thing. I mean, you can't understate that, right? Like that's what got us killed in EQ so many times, right? That extra unintended pull,
yeah.
The stuff like that.
And we've seen it in Pantheon streams. Like,
Yeah.
they'll be fighting something, they pull one more mob, and it's game over. So
Yeah, exactly.
Commercial Employer 4. So we had the world's greatest CEO, and now we have Commercial Employer 4, which is kind of funny.
What's going on here?
I don't know. He says Pantheon is sounding more and more like a virtual homage to Dungeons and Dragons or Pathfinder. In between play sessions, everybody involved brainstorms on how events could have transpired differently, debating why it was the case, and developing a better strategy for the next encounter. I loved that comment. You know me, Theric, we've talked a lot about like MMOs, and I've always said like it comes down to what that experience was like. It started at playing D&D with your friends at a table and saying, this would be really cool if we were in the world and could see our character. And that's what MMOs came from.
I just feel like that's been the path we've been on for 30 years, right? Trying to find the ultimate D&D experience, right? And we always thought it would be better once we had better computers, but it turns out it's not about having a better computer, right? It's about getting closer to that core of what that experience was.
Yep. And then the last one here is from Bison ST. He says, well, that was a cool story. I like the bit about the ledge in the tunnel. In other MMOs, it's obvious where you can go, or there would be gimmicky fake walls you run through. But in Pantheon, a little awareness on the player's part kept the adventure going, and he can't wait for beta. So it's just really cool hearing how people connected with the story we put out there on last week's Rewind. And we just received overwhelming support, not just for the content, but for what VR is doing. And honestly, that means a lot more to me, because that's really our goal here at Pantheon.Plus. Like, we want to fairly and honestly cover the game, its progress, and hopefully build on the community's excitement. Like, that's the end of the day. That's it, man.
That's right.
Right. So to hear people who are encouraged to pledge, up their pledge, or consider putting eyes back on Pantheon because of this story, it's just awesome. And personally, I can't wait to get to tell more stories in the future and stream and do crazy fun stuff just to make people laugh. Like, it's just going to be such a fun time. But I've talked a lot on this. Theric, what are your thoughts?
Well, it's all great feedback, and I agree, and I won't restate some of the stuff. But one of the consistent themes that I said earlier, another one that I saw, is how we presented the information. Like, when you strip away all the visual, all the audio, all the UI elements that we, as gamers have become trained to focus on, what you're left with is what really matters, right? That core experience. And I think that's what resonated with people. And the other thing, the feedback part of it too, is that the feedback is more refined. So instead of getting feedback about low polygon trees or, animation inconsistencies and that kind of stuff, we heard things about combat balancing and some things about the perception system. And I know VR values that greatly, right? Because that's just, it's awesome feedback, and it's critical. And, like I said, it was a fun week. I can't wait till we get to do this again. And I remember I messaged you, shortly before or after the show, I think. And I said, man, when the game launches, we have to do a segment on the Rewind called Weekly Adventures or something like that, right? How fun would that be? Where we can really tell a little story every week like this. So.
Yeah. And Bronson, who's a great community member, he's playing a rogue too. And we've already talked about doing like strip down from our armor, put all our bags, and see how deep we can sneak into different places.
Oh, that'll be fun.
Oh yeah. I lose all my experience all the time.
Like I said, yeah, that'll be fun.
Nice. So the last piece of news, and not going too crazy into this, but Chris Joppa Perkins was in a PAX panel. So if you missed this, it was the title of the panel was The Future of Online Games. So it was, I think it was on Tuesday night. It was released, in which Joppa joined a panel featuring, and if I'm butchering these names, I'm sorry, Stephen Sharif from Ashes of Creation, John Smedley, who a lot of people know from his days at EQ. He's now one of the heads of Amazon Game Studios. And we had J. Todd Coleman, who is part of Crowfall, and I think back in the day did Shadowbane. So this wasn't like something you're going to watch to get more beans about Pantheon, but what I do think it did is help us step even further forward. Like, so we had the PA stuff, and now we have this, just to kind of really build confidence in exactly what Visionary Realms is trying to do and what they're building. Joppa talked about what's important about building a game, what he feels was lost along the way, what the future may look like. It even talks a little bit about cross-platform gaming, but I think a lot of Pantheon fans will be excited to know he pretty much shut down Pantheon being a cross-platform game.
I was very happy to hear that.
Yeah. So it's worth a listen, and I think Joppa and Sharif came off very, very well. I think if you watch it, those two seemed to be the most respectful, the most thoughtful, and when they spoke, like, I was kind of hanging on their words about, what they thought of the genre and where it is right now. So we do have it in the links below under VR news and notes. You can check that out. But Theric, did you watch this? Like, what were your thoughts?
Yeah, I did watch it, and it was certainly worth my time. And we actually had a good little conversation going in Discord while we were watching it, sort of commenting on it. And after watching it, there was one thought that kept going through my mind, and it's the belief that it's not about making the biggest game; it's about making the best game, right? So you could tell in this panel, what the guiding vision was for the game from the different panelists, and some are guided by different visions, and not a vision of how successful the game will be, but how the game will look, what it will be like what kind of game they're making. And I think if you watch the panel, there is a stark contrast about who's guided by which vision.
Yeah.
And, I'm not going to be critical. I'm not going to go, negative or anything like that. I love what Joppa said. I think he's, it was no surprise to hear him present the way he did. The title of the panel, The Future of Online Games, I think it speaks volumes to how we, as the market for these games, we have a say in what the future looks like. What vision do we support through our time and our money, right? And I'll leave it at that. But I think your assessment minus, Joppa, and I think Stephen Streif came off as well, very well. So, but it was a good panel. I enjoyed watching it.
Yeah, and anyone out there know I'm no Ashes fan. I'm not a guy who's going to be campaigning for Ashes. I don't. Yeah. I don't even see myself playing it if it launches or when it launches. It's one of those games that, again, is just so ambitious that it has 7,000 things layered into it. It's a very different game from Pantheon. But again, watching that for the hour that it was on, I thought he really did a great job. So, I mean, if you're a fan of that game, it sounds like you have a guy like we have for Pantheon and Joppa. And that's exciting to hear because, again, I don't think me or you, Theric, are really rooting for any game to fail. We want to see as many of these games succeed as we can. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I want people to have a game that they enjoy playing. And I just think it's really interesting when you see the differences between the visionaries, so to speak.
And the corporate guys.
Yeah.
I know what you're saying.
Well, I know exactly. I'm holding back. I don't want to critique too harshly, but praise Joppa.
Yeah.
Thank God for Joppa.
Well, that's it for VR news and notes. When the Pantheon community speaks, we listen. So let's dig into social media and see what the discussion is all about.
Okay, so this week for the community discussion, I want to dig into something that was talked about on the most recent VIP Developers Roundtable from August, which was released to the public earlier this week. In the discussion, one of the main points that was covered was the NPC faction system in Pantheon. And it came up a lot. And here's a short sort of synopsis of what we learned in that developers roundtable before we get to the discussion. So here's what Joppa said. He said, quote, "Pretty nice depth of faction ties exists. Any given NPC could have multiple factions which they're aligned with, multiple factions they're at war with. How you interact with that NPC could alter your faction on many different fronts. You can actually declare war on a faction and essentially make yourself able, in doing so, to attack those things." End quote. So that's what Joppa said. He went on to talk about basically how they have to make it work, what it is, what is and what isn't an attackable NPC in the game within their offensive and defensive targeting system. So if you're neutral or above, you can't attack them by right-clicking on them, but you would be able to see that faction in the UI, and you can choose, like he said, to declare war on them, which would enable you to then attack them. He described it as a solution that gives the players agency while still allowing interaction with non-hostile NPCs. And Joppa noted they have to be careful, though, in allowing sort of how you do this, because if you can become friendly with any faction, you'll trivialize a lot of content, right? You don't want to be able to do that. So this was a good topic, and our friend Nefel picked up on this in the forums and posted a topic talking about this. And he was basically using this as a base to go about evolving, what's the process through which we change factions? How do we do that? And it's basically to move beyond simple slaughtering of one group to raise faction with another. Here's how Nefel stated it. He said, quote, "If we want faction to really stay meaningful in Pantheon long term, there needs to be more to gaining faction than simply killing things to move your numbers up. Adventuring should be part of the process for sure, but mindless slaughter should only get you so far. Therefore, I would propose the following basic system for gaining faction in Pantheon. So number one, killing only gets you so far. When you're just starting out and standing with a particular faction, killing is a viable strategy, but only to a point. Slaughtering someone's enemies might get them to start talking to you, but it will not make them trust you on its own. Number 2, what have you done for me lately? If you want to keep building your faction, you'll have to undertake tasks for that faction. At first, these might be simple things. After all, nobody trusts you with anything that's actually important, but as your standing gets higher, you have to take on greater challenges to keep proving yourself and raising your standing. And then thirdly, prove your allegiance. At some point, the faction you're working on is going to ask you to prove yourself, probably with a task that's not very easy. They may send you to wipe out a hated enemy, recover a precious item, or do something else like that. Whatever it is, be assured that the risk will be extremely high, as well as the consequences you may face with other factions for doing it. Choose wisely, because the faction giving you the task may not even expect you to succeed. But if you do, perhaps they will finally trust you as one of their own. So I love the way Nefel posts. He writes in such a storytelling kind of way. I always enjoy reading
like
his
choose
stuff.
your own adventure. Yeah.
Yeah. He's very deep with this stuff, and I love it. So here's what the community had. They had some interesting thoughts about it. The first person said yes to 1 and 2, but not to 3. So that was the one where like the last step where you have to like prove your allegiance. So the person said the architecture does not fit standing with a faction. It's more of a progression within an order. Faction is something semi-passive. It's how you're perceived by others through your actions, but not through what they asked you to do. It always felt strange you could just sort of grab faction quests in games. Not something you would do to increase your standing towards people, but if you were in a rank or in an order or something like that, yes, then you would. Emlar said, faction is supposed to reflect your behavior towards a given community. I agree with you. Killing zillions of Coldane dwarves doesn't make you in any way a frost giant friend. The mechanisms behind factions should reflect your overall behavior, not only your local behavior. Instead of designing a faction as a siloed ranking where increase and decrease is made on specific actions, I would suggest making faction related to moral values. Every quest and some killings should be morally traits oriented. Each NPCs could favor certain levels of moral traits and despise others. Chenzim said, if I ask you to do something for me and you do a good job, then you'll be looked upon more favorably by myself and anyone I choose to tell. I think the killing side of factions should be kept to a minimum, and that deeds are undertaken to be things that progress your level in the various societies and factions. As long as there are lots of interwoven factions, I can see this being a very interesting system to be involved with. Dorothy said, actions should have consequences and some things should be irreversible. You shouldn't ever be able to fully recover from causing a faction to truly hate you. Maybe you can raise your hate to mistrust so you aren't killed on sight, but no further than that. No one truly trusts or loves a traitor, even if their faction the traitor has benefited. Stonefish is the last one, and it's one of the posters you read earlier. He said, what about flags at levels of faction that cause permanent standing? Thus, ensuring a faction never forgives your past actions and adds a consequence for your true path through the world. If you want to try and play both sides, you better be slippery and never go too far in either direction. Risk is high that someone becomes an outcast in large parts of the world. So those are the responses from the community, and some good stuff there and a couple different points. I really enjoy the last two ones about being careful in playing the faction system because the potential for an irreversible standing comes up. And I saw this discussed a couple other places, and it was kind of like some people are yes, no, you should always be able to repair your faction. I think it adds some really interesting considerations for like when you're making these choices. Now, if you combine like Nefel's ideas and then you've got a really evolved faction system, I think. And I love that VR is like leaning into NPC factions like this because I think it really does add a lot of depth to the game. I can't wait to like declare war on supposed friends of mine. Like, so if I'm playing an elf, and I decide the Spriggan are, better off as kindling than creatures, I can go up to them, and instead of right clicking and having a conversation, I can right click, declare war, and, be done with them if I choose to do that. But I don't know. What do you think, Minus? Do you have any thoughts on what Joppa said about faction or about any of Nef's suggestions?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you in the one part that you said you can't wait to declare war on your supposed friends. Yeah, me neither, oddly enough. Right? Okay. Fun. Yeah, right? So A couple things. One of the first commenters actually was talking about how they liked the first and second, but not the prove your allegiance part. And it's interesting because they said that like factions should be semi-passive. And then they had a statement that said it's how you're perceived by others, not through your actions, but what they've but not what they've asked you to do. Actually, I disagree with that. I think a combination of that is intuitive. Like, okay, who is this guy? We don't know. Go, move along. All of a sudden you go and you kill all these orcs, right? And they're like, this guy's been killing a lot of our enemies. Let's figure out what he's all about. Like, hey, go do this little thing for us. Okay. It's kind of like when you're in a job, like you do grunt work, you work your way up the ladder. I think that the combination of the passive and then actively seeking these quests is even what EQ used to do. Let's be honest. That was kind of how that worked too.
Totally.
Yeah, so I kind of disagree that those are tied together and that it should be separate because I feel like I definitely feel like those things make sense, I guess.
Yeah. It would be too hard if it was like no killing involved, right? If it was just based on tasks or things you've done from like a storyline perspective. There's always got to be that killing and working on your faction from a. We use the word grind sometimes, and in EQ, you definitely did the grind for faction to get things done that you needed to do. So, you're right. It is like a job too, and I'm always working on my faction at work, right? I'm always trying to make myself not kill on sight to my boss, but some days are better than others.
Yeah, my faction's not great at work right now. I'm a little too feisty. I did want to bring something up that's interesting though, because like you're talking about like, playing the factions and, the slippery slope of like, don't go too far down and so you can work your way back up and you can use it to your advantage. Being a rogue, one of the things, and I don't know if a lot of people have seen this, but one of the descriptors on the old website, and it might be on the new one, the rogue was that they were considered the faceless affairs of nations. So it made me think of that right away. Like as a rogue, like these people in the shadows who help political gain and have this influence, but no one knows it's them. And then I thought about that whole like faction back and forth, playing both sides, being a traitor. Yeah. I was like, man, that's totally me in my class.
Yeah. I love that too. That's awesome that you remembered that. And I think it was the one of the signature characters stories, Janisova, is all sort of about that. It's very, very cool. And yeah, you're right. That's a great bring up.
Yeah. So what do you think?
What do you think about the irreversible part? I'm just curious as to whether you think you should be able to permanently damage, like you can never get it back.
So immersion fans would say you should have that penalty, right? Like if you go kill the king of a city or something, why would they ever like you again? But I think there still has to be a game to it. So I'm not super into permanent you're screwed forever on your character because who knows what's going to come in a future expansion? Like, are you going to ruin 5 expansions worth of content because you made a bad decision?
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah,
I don't like that.
Enough.
Yeah, I don't like that.
It's a little dangerous to do that. Okay, so introductions for the week. We just had one, and it came from CD. He said, or she, I don't know. They said, "Hey everyone, I've been following Pantheon since 2018, and I finally decided to move forward with a pledge. I'm a fairly hardcore gamer, and I'm very familiar with EQ from vanilla through to Velius. The raid scene in Project 1999 Blue burnt me out quickly enough, though. I've played a ton of WoW Classic last year solely as a gnome mage without much left to do. So can't wait to get started with Pantheon and hopeful for its success." So cheers, CD, and welcome. I wanted to point out a resource. Somebody on the forums and on Reddit was cross-posted there. Malok Failure put on them a spreadsheet listing the armor and weapons that are available to each class in accordance with the recently updated class pages on the website. If you're like me, like it's helpful to always see it laid out like that, like in sort of a visual learning kind of way. It gives you an easy way to compare the classes. So I put a link to that in the description in the video as well as in the show notes. So if you want to check that out. Well done, Malok Failure. Really appreciate you doing that. And then last but not least, I have to give congrats to Rewind listener Odd Bunny. He was the one who won the Watchers Pledge that we gave away last week during the premiere. This was a huge thing. We had 31 people who threw their names in the hat for this, and the internet gods favored Odd Bunny that day. And it was I was like writing names down like a madman during the premiere to try and track all these names and make sure I got them entered. And so he was the one that got it that day. And I want to thank Zergjerk as well. He helped me with this a little bit, sort of facilitating this, communicating with VR to get this thing done. And so congrats again, and stay tuned because we've got more giveaways planned for down the road. So, and we'll leave it at that for this week's community discussions.
Let's talk content creator updates and new additions to Pantheon.Plus. All right, in this section, we kind of talk about what's going on at Pantheon.Plus, talking about recent videos, schedules for the community, etc. So, and what the content creators are doing. So let's start with added content on Pantheon.Plus. And there was a lot of content last week, so let's just jump right to it. So Bazgrim put out a quick Baz flash discussing details of the next PA5 shakeout taking place, as you listen, like live right now. That's happening. But starting yesterday and concluding today. So you can check that out if you want a quick update on sort of what it's all about and what testers will be facing. There's little things that were announced in detail wise there. Nathan put out 2 videos last week. The first one discussed his feelings on the idea of Pantheon having a free trial period. Sort of for new players to get an idea what Pantheon's all about, especially because it's going to be a little different from what's out there right now. It's a little more challenging. So this was met with a lot of varying opinions to the community, but it is worth noting that this is something that even even Brad and Ben and Joppa all talked about in the past. So I don't know where they stand with it right now, but I just, it's been something they've been contemplating for a bit, I guess you'd say. So if you kind of want to get Nathan's view on it, check out that video. You get his idea on what he thinks it would do for the game or the community. His second video was a little more of a fun video, one of the crazy mind of Nathan Napalm style videos. He makes you laugh as he starts talking to future Pantheon players in something that he considers like a little time capsule that, and he's talking to the players who are playing in the game. And if you're looking for just a smile or to laugh a little bit, while we're all waiting, it's a really good time. It's funny. It's not too long. So check that out. Pantheon.Plus had a lot of content go out this week. So to begin with, we saw our first ever Pantheon profiles from Drac. These were highlighting community members 10 and Ellerin. And he used to do the written blog-based ones, which I believe he's still going to do in the future once our sections are up. But he actually put them in a video format. And I got to tell you, he doesn't make videos. And it was pretty well done. I enjoyed the whole format of it. It's simple. Yeah. It's to the point. It's not very long. And they're great. I really like how he did it. I mean, I like hearing people's voice. I mean, I have to admit, when you get people out from behind the keyboard and you get them talking, that's what I like. And, you hear 10 and you heard Ellerin both tell stories of, their experiences with MMOs, and great stories. So I really enjoy what he's doing there. Yeah. It's a really cool, concept for, again, community, which we talk about all the time. Theric, you put a video out in your Perception and Pantheon series. You gave players a guided tour through Thronefast. Now, I personally enjoy the hell out of these videos, and I've said this a ton of times, but the video you did like this for Black Rose Keep was probably one of my favorite videos you ever did. So if you guys haven't seen that one, check it out, but definitely check out the new Thronefast one. That's always my goal. Whenever I'm making a new video, I'm like, is this as good as the Black Rose Keep one? Will Minus enjoy this one as the Black Rose Keep one? But yeah, that Thronefest video was pretty fun to do. It was sitting for a long time. I'd had it done for a while, and we just sort of waited on it. And it was nice to finally get it out the door. So I gotten lots of positive feedback. So I'm glad you guys liked it. Yeah, I mean, it took off huge, and people are really excited to step foot in that city because of the tour you gave them. So really cool stuff. If you guys haven't seen that, check it out. So we also did a potpourri version episode of Pantheon.Plus. We've never really done that before. We kind of just talked about all the crazy stuff that's been going on in the month, like the website update, the class changes, the PA5 story we gave out, PAX, PA5 in general. And we had Nefel join us for that, who also announced that, they're joining us. So we're going to have Pantheon Crafters. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second, but so it was a cool Pantheon.Plus. We had a good crowd. We had a really good green room. So we spent a lot of time in the green room. So if you haven't seen that, that'll be up on demand this weekend. So just check for YouTube, or you can check it out on Twitch. So what is being worked on? That's the second part we usually talk about here. So we've talked a little bit about it previously, but our main page is coming along really nicely. So we've changed the format of the whole site up quite a bit so that you get to see the newest content easily, regardless of like what creator makes it. And this is going to be huge when it comes to article submission and being able to stay up to date with the newest content that's out there. And while it's not live yet, it's pretty much complete. And the only reason we're not live with it is because we just want to wait to get articles done. So we just throw that in there and have a one-time update. So, Burris, who's our new front-end developer, he's working really hard on that piece. He's been updating me every day. We are really fast progressing finally. And Poirier's been working on some of the back-end stuff, but he's also now revamping our class page as well for easier navigation. So when we do put this next phase out, you guys should see quite a bit of streamlining, a little bit easier use, and hopefully some more fun details to check out on there and a reason to kind of engage people and talk. So fingers crossed on that.
Yeah.
So the last piece we usually do in this section is other news from us. What's going on? What are we doing out there? So again, the huge piece of news that we just talked about was Nefel and the Pantheon Crafters team joining forces and becoming part of Pantheon.Plus. So I just wanted to take a minute here. It's not super long, but Nefel put out a forum post on Pantheon Crafters, and I'm just going to kind of read you what he said because I think he sums it up really well on like why we're doing this and what the goal is. So let me just read you his post. Here we go. So he says, when we first set up Pantheon Crafters, we had the idea that it would be many things: a hub for community discussion, a resource for players who are participating in crafting and gathering, and a place for us to bring forward the best ideas around crafting and gathering to support the ongoing development of Pantheon. This fall, we're planning to merge websites, and we have Pantheon Crafters now becoming a core part of Pantheon.Plus or Pantheon.Plus. This is not us throwing in the towel. Rather, this is us joining forces with their team to take the initial vision even further and give us a lot of cool new capabilities. So just some things that they kind of highlight here. He said, after the merge, we'll be able to post blog-style articles and highlight them on Pantheon.Plus front page. We'll also gain the capability to create and post guides, including video guides that we can begin leveraging as time goes on. Pantheon.Plus will gain a backend that they can expand on for forum discussions, as well as the ability to connect a wiki module, helping the overall site become a better hub for the Pantheon community. The merger will give a larger technical team because we have a bigger team in general. And we're going to bring crafting and gathering perspective to Pantheon.Plus, which will help us not only reaching more potential Pantheon players, but continuing to promote the vision of meaningful, engaging, and fun non-combat gameplay for Pantheon. So he does also say, we're not exactly sure what the exact date when you see all these things, but hopefully sooner than later. So Eric, I know you've had a really long relationship with Nefel. I'm just curious on your thoughts here about the merger. And maybe with all that you've known about what they've been doing and what he does for the community, could you maybe give the audience listening some insight on what this would mean for people who follow Pantheon.Plus or go to the website once all this stuff is going on?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, like you said, I've known Nefel for a while, and I've always enjoyed his the way he articulates things and his ideas in general. And he's sort of I would consider him the foremost expert on the crafting aspect of Pantheon. So this is really a complementary fit for both sites. It brings two communities together, right? Because sometimes we get segregated into these like different communities about what our interests are. But when you bring those together, you get people interested in crafting who might not have been, or you get people who are just interested in the crafting aspect, more invested in the adventuring aspect or other things like that. So, and in fact, somebody asked me actually this week, like in light of the recent announcement, with this merge, what role, if any, do you think crafters should have in like raid scene or perceived best in slot items? So it's just an example of somebody bringing, that sphere, those two spheres together. And when they meet, I know we've seen in some developer streams, high-end mobs dropping rare crafting materials. So there's really going to be a need for this kind of a resource that can deliver both aspects. And I think this is a really exciting thing. And I can't wait to see what Nefel and his team, bring into this and what this sort of looks like at the end when the site's fully merged and when all the features are sort of functional. But, with the ideas and the sort of vision that you and Nefel both have, I don't see how it can go wrong. So I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, it's definitely exciting. And we, like I said, we kind of did that Pantheon plus you together, and he knows his stuff, maybe even more than me when it comes to like the history of Pantheon, especially crafting. I think I can go toe to toe with him in the adventure aspects and the classes and stuff, but it's a really nice fit to our team and in a side of maybe our team that was lacking a little bit with the crafting side. So
yeah, cool. For sure. Agreed.
All right, well, that's it with what's going on at Pantheon.Plus, what we're looking to do, and some of our expansion plans, and hopefully some really cool future stuff. Here's the mail, it never fails. It makes me want to wag my tail. When it gets here, I just yell, mail! We're getting sued.
Okay, so again, awesome bumper. Love that every time. It's time for the mailbox. I think you might be the
only one.
No, definitely not. Definitely not. Everybody loves it.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll run through some of these questions here. Give a couple thoughts on each one. First one comes from Lucille, who is a good member of the community. And she says, something I'd absolutely love to see in Pantheon is 6 and 12-man encounters. Would you think these could fit into the world of Pantheon in the future? And so I was thinking about this question, and she clarified that it also was, she's not talking about like instancing. She was more thinking about like raid sizes. And we've had this discussion before, minimum, what's the maximum raid size? And I think, you think about a 6-person encounter, that's basically, I think, what, most of the world's sort of being designed for, right? Like it's sort of going to be the norm is the 6-person group. Now a 12-man group, so you're talking about a 12-man encounter, so you're talking about 2 full groups. I think there's some good ideas about, small raid sizes and some content design for this specifically. And I'm sure there will be some deviation like up and down in terms of like the content of where 2 is, maybe not quite enough or maybe just a little more than you need. But it's an interesting question. And I think that there's interesting design that can go on there too. But what do you think about that one?
6-man is obviously going to have encounters because that's the dungeon group size, And as far as raid encounters go, it's a combination of things. Like we don't know what that's going to look like. When you need that raid group, is it just to take the boss down? Like, can you have a 6-man group who makes it to the boss, but just isn't strong enough to take the boss down? Or is the trash that's around the enemy, does that require all those groups to break it apart and control it? There's a lot of interesting things we have to think about because let's say the boss took, 40 people, but everything around it with 12 people, you could clear out and farm like, rare drops and stuff like that off the trash mobs or like mini bosses and stuff. So it's going to be interesting to see how that exactly plays out. Like when you go into a raid zone, is it all scaled to 40 or are there going to be small groups in there camping small areas? It's really interesting to kind of think of how that's going to play out. I'm not really sure where VR is going with that yet. But I think they've said you're going to have 6-man groups for like dungeons and regular stuff. And then there were 2 raid sizes. I thought, was it 24 and 40?
What's a good question? I don't remember off the top of my head.
I think that was it. I could be wrong. Don't quote me on that, but I think it was 24 and 40 because everyone was real weirded out by the 40. It's like, why?
Yeah, that's right. Because it was off the 6. Yeah, it wasn't a multiple of 6.
Yeah, it's like, okay.
Yeah, that's a good point though. I didn't think about that, but you're totally right. Okay, so next question comes from our buddy JJ, and I'll try to reword it here a little bit because it's a little bit long. But he says sometimes an MMO will build the players around the game. For an example, constantly changing classes, abilities, systems, that kind of thing, rather than actually expanding the game, and they lose some identity for what the game is known for. With what you've seen in Pantheon thus far, how important do you feel it is for VR to continue building the game around the players? In other words, would you prefer a system where you keep everything you've earned across the lifetime of the game and have future content built around that level of player power? I'll let you go first on this one. What do you think?
I think my answer might shock people here. I like when classes change.
Wow. Okay.
So hear me out on this. So, I played WoW for 14 years. And I played Paladin in every walk of it. I've played Paladin in some way, shape, or form. If for 14 years my Paladin played pretty much the same, that would be boring. It was exciting to get new gear that changed how I played, or my abilities changed, or a new talent set came up. In this game, it could be a new mastery set that kind of changes your play style. That kind of thing to me keeps me excited to play my quote unquote main. And it teaches me a new way to play. If what I learn in the first vanilla Pantheon in a rotation or the way I play is viable for 70 years, that's boring. Not having to challenge myself to learn my class better or to learn a different way to play or adapt to a new expansion. I I like the challenge and change. I mean, WoW did it a lot. WoW did it where, in a tier of rating, when you had the gear sets, you would get a set of gear and it would completely change how your abilities worked because all of a sudden certain abilities were better that you didn't use before. So you'd put on that set of gear and then you'd redo your entire toolkit and you were playing the game completely differently. And it would do that every raid tier. And it was really exciting because you'd go into a new raid, you thought you were really strong, and you get these new setups. You're like, oh my God, this is so much cooler. So
It's really interesting.
I like that we change a bit. And I don't know if that fits in Pantheon. I don't know. I'd be very curious to ask Joppa that question, to be completely honest. But I think that when I have to relearn aspects of my favorite class, it's like falling in love all over again. And sure, there's some frustrations, but that's also what falling in love is like. So, but that's my piece on it. Yeah, that's my piece on it.
Yeah, I kind of took the opposite approach. And I understand what you're saying. And I've kind of swayed a little bit just hearing you say that. But what I said, I think is class design, when it's at the core of your game, it should really be one of those things that changes the least. People put a lot of thought into their class choice. I think it's one of the things that hooks people and grounds them in the game. And when that gets fundamentally changed, now fundamental change and variation are two different things, right? I know it doesn't have to be one or the other, but even some of the slightest changes, sometimes it's hard to keep it in the spirit of the way the class was built or what the identity of the class is. So when you have the option to, instead of changing class, change the content around them, and you can change how the class plays by building different content around them. I think that's probably the better way to go in my mind, at least. I don't want to see people lose connections with their class just because, for the sake of keeping it fresh and interesting, they feel that they need to add new abilities or take some abilities away or change how an ability works. If you've got really good class design to begin with, I think you can stay pretty, close to that path and then build the world out instead of the player. But that's a great question by JJ. I didn't know you were going to take that approach. And I think that your answer is very, I mean, there's a lot of temptation for me to agree with that too, but interesting one. Okay, on to the next question. This comes from oh my gosh, I'm going to butcher her name. Arinellis. And we played with her in Vanguard just on Monday. We were in a group. She was my tank for my group, so I should know how to pronounce her name.
Yeah, anyway, we were racing to content. She was faster than my giant, so she was like beating me across the bridge with my. It's funny. Yeah,
she is pro. So anyway, she says in EQ there were a few areas where the ice was actually slippery. I have a fond memory of venturing into one such place, though I can't remember what the name of it was, and having people slip off the edge of the ramp or the pathway and fall down to their death. I've missed
lower
something.
Guck. Lower Guck.
Oh, well, lower Guck, was it slippery there or was it just like narrow? Because
there was a slippery area where you fall into the water. It might have actually been an upper Guck to find your path down to lower Guck, and you could fall in the water. And then they were it was awful. We were playing recently and everyone fell in there. And one person drowned because they couldn't figure out how to swim up and down.
Yeah, no, and that happened to the best of us for sure. And Erin Ellis just finishes. She says, it's something I've missed is the simple slippery ice in a game where I played, and that's something that she enjoyed. Should VR incorporate this into Pantheon, perhaps even expand on it? And so this is a great question. And when she asked this, it was Velkator's Labyrinth in EQ that had those slippery, stupid ramps, right? They were crazy. And while I admit that I like the realism of it in practice, I mean, if I'm being perfectly honest, it was just a pain in the butt. We're going to have enough to worry about with climates and acclimation, we're going to be burning, freezing, toxic, all these different climates. And then to have to sort of like do a little platforming as well with your slippery walking. That bridge that goes into Amberfate, they've shown it on the streams a couple times. Can you imagine like sliding, like doing like a run up towards that and just sliding down the whole thing? I mean, it would be kind of fun, but I think I'd probably not enjoy it after the first time. So it might be fun, it might be fun to push your rogue friend off that icy ledge once in a while, but I don't think I want to see this in the game.
So I think I'm almost 100% certain it's been said this stuff will be in game.
Oh, really? Why did I not remember that?
And
Okay.
they kind of were hinting at it like during the co-stream when he was trying to jump the platforms and the wind was blowing him off and like he couldn't stay on the surface. And they've talked about like intangible ground. And they've talked about needing certain climbing gear, possibly if it's icy or it's harder to climb, you may need certain stuff. So I think this is, I almost want to say this has been confirmed by Joppa in some sense. Like, I don't know to what level it's going to be, but I think it ties perfectly into climates. Like if it's an ice climate, there should be some icy floor for sure.
Oh, it's interesting. We'll have to look into that. We'll have to follow up on that at some point.
Yeah.
Okay. Go ahead. Did you want to say something about that?
Ping Joppa and annoy him, but no, I won't.
Yeah, maybe at some point we will. So next question came from John Wayne. He said, should there be skills that are locked behind high-end content, like the best of the best, so to speak? And I've got a really simple answer for this, and that's definitely yes. The carrot on the stick has to mean something, right? Like keep it, thing to keep in mind is that those skills, they'll be attainable through other means. If you can't do that, if you can't get them through adventuring, you have to buy them on the marketplace or through your guild or whatever it may be. But yeah, we definitely need those things. And I think I heard you agree with me, right?
Yeah, I totally agree. Like I don't even care if it's not able to be bought on the marketplace. Like let's say there's a boss that, drops a wizard spell, and when that's active content, maybe only, 50% of the wizards actually have that spell. And if you group with someone who has it, it's like, oh, that's awesome. Like, I think that adds some uniqueness to the player to have that skill set to get it. And sure, everyone who can't get it's going to be upset, but oh well, this isn't a hand-holding game. There's no participation trophies in Pantheon, I don't think. So
Exactly.
And as content becomes dated and people become stronger, then you can go get it. You're not going to not have it forever, but you may not have it at the beginning. And I think that's fine.
Sure, of course. Yep. Okay, so a couple more quick ones here. Lafael said, would you be supportive of a soft launch of Pantheon where certain pledges had early access, like prior to official launch, and why or why not? So what do you think about that one?
The part of me that, especially the old me that wanted to get in early and wanted to be ahead, would have said, heck yeah. Like I was in the Rift early start. I was in quite a few early starts. For this game, no, I don't want it. Being that it's going to be a niche crowd and it's going to maybe be a smaller crowd, although who knows? I think this game's going to be a lot bigger than most people thought it was going to be at the beginning. I kind of want to step into the world with everybody at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, me too. Yeah, I said no for the same reason. I don't want to divide the community. Sometimes it can create that ill will a little bit right from the start. It's important for a community-centric game where people who want to be part of the community don't feel like second-class citizens right off the hop, and feel like other people are getting ahead. So yeah, no, it's a no for me too. So, and then last question from Marks. He asked, AoE tanking, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Personally, I'm on the fence. One thing that bothers me about it is when a game gives all the DPS some kind of multi-target damaging abilities, but then leaves the tanks unable to hold AoE aggro. So, I think it's kind of a good thing. I think probably it's necessary here. I know that there are some abilities that do that kind of spread out damage. And I'm not sure, and you might know better than I, but don't warriors have something like this? Like they have AoE effects through their banners, I know. I don't know if one of those is like a taunt banner, but I can't imagine there's not some way to draw a taunt over an area of effect, right?
Yeah, and I don't think it's a bad thing either. So there's a big difference between AoE tanking and just AoEing down everything, right? So like if a warrior's geared up well and they have the right skill set to be really damage absorbs but don't do much damage, they're really just full on tank. And they can hold, like, let's say 3 enemies. They jump in, they AoE tank them, they're holding them, they're tab targeting across them to hold the aggro. But, the group's not necessarily AoEing everything down. They're still like, okay, well, first kill this, wizard, and then we're going to switch over to, the rogue, and then we'll kill the warrior. So, the warrior who's tanking is tab targeting, keeping aggro, and, keeping the other enemies off the healer while DPS is focusing down specific targets. That's phenomenal gameplay. I don't think that is, everyone's fear, I think, with AoE tanking again is like the WoW method of run in, pull the whole group, AoE it all down, move to the next group. AoE tanking does not necessarily have to be tied to AoE destruction. So I like it. I like the idea of that. Obviously depending on the mobs, But I would love to, if I was going to tank, I'd love to be able to hold 2 or 3 enemies and hold them, with heals. People healing me like crazy, using some cooldowns, especially until we get that first one down. But I think that that's fun tanking gameplay because tanking is in itself so important, and usually games are lacking tanks. Like, don't make it super boring. Like, tanking one enemy is okay, and it's all right if you have like interrupts and you're doing stuff. But where the fun comes in for a tank is managing multiple mobs and doing stuff like that. So you wouldn't really want to take that away, in my opinion.
No, that's a really good answer. That comes from years of experience. You can tell. So, right on, man. And that's the mailbag this week. So yeah, that's it.
Well, awesome show again. Thank you for everything you do. Last week was insane. I hope you guys have enjoyed this episode. It's more of a standard episode for us, but still, I mean, I got to say, we've done, this will be episode 24, and there's always a lot to talk about with Pantheon. And we hope that you guys find that, source of when you're sitting there waiting for more and you want more, join us, chat, ask questions. We'll do our best to answer them or find the answers for you. But thank you again for hanging out at the Rewind this week. And we'll see you next week on episode 25.
Yep. Cheers.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Pantheon.Plus Rewind. Be sure to follow Minus and all Pantheon.Plus related content on Twitter, Twitch, and YouTube under the name Pantheon.Plus. Also, be sure to follow Theric at PantheonTheric on Twitter. Keep up to date on all Pantheon Rise of the Fallen information on www.Pantheon.Plus, the definitive source for all media of Pantheon. Until next time.